Hi, hello, welcome. Let's just give it a second here before we dive in for any lagging to just disappear. I often have problems with this. If you are indeed watching me live here and not the replay, I'm always curious to hear where you're from in the chat. And give me a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind. Give me a little thumbs emoji in the chat if you can hear me okay. Because I always have, as I just had on the original one, so this is round 2 here. I always have problems with audio here, but it seems to be good and working, so that's very good. But do let me know in the chat where you're from. Apologies in advance also for any slight delay. There's sometimes a slight delay between the visual and the audio because of my Wi-Fi. This usually corrects itself within a few seconds, so please give me your patience on that here. And let's dive in. I think so many of my viewers are experiencing amazing weight loss and health turnarounds with this incredible whole foods plant-based methodology, let's say, or approach to nutrition. But in this stream, what I'd like to do is serve those on the other side of the coin who have converted to this approach and maybe aren't seeing the weight loss results that they expected or hoped for, or they initially were losing a good amount of weight, but they've stalled for whatever reason lately. What I'd also like to highlight here is that it's assumed in all of these 7 tips and tricks, it's assumed that you are being consistent, because that's one of the biggest barriers to weight loss success, regardless of diet, and that's consistency. So I'm not even going to include consistency in my 7 tips and tricks here. It's already assumed that you are being consistent, and these are just things that can take you to that next level despite your decent level of consistency right now. Does that make sense? So 7 tips and tricks for those who are on the other sides of the coin and aren't necessarily breaking through on the scale we hoped. Before we dive into tip number 1 here though, if you're looking for simple plant-based solutions to lose your first 20 pounds, learn how to keep it off for life and create sustainable habits, applications are now open for the 2.0 version of my vegan, slim, and sustained coaching program where you can work one-on-one with me. So simply head over to ryanadamscoaching.com. Once more, that's ryanadamscoaching.com, or click the link in the description box down below to learn more about my program and to apply there. Step number 1 then, let's dive in. Thank you very much, all of you commenting in the chat. Lovely to have you here. Step number 1, fill your diet with legumes. Legumes are amazing. Low in fat, high in fiber. Fiber really important for weight loss. I'm always emphasizing it, which helps you stay full for a long period of time. Fiber has many, many benefits, but certainly from a satiation perspective, that's one of the biggest advantages when it comes to weight loss. Helps you stay full for a long period of time. Legumes are satisfying as a result of that. They're also satisfying as a result of the bulk they provide for their low caloric density. So in terms of satiation per calorie, let's say, very, very good in that regard. They also, one thing I like about them is they offer lots of versatility. There's quite a lot you can do with legumes. So I appreciate that isn't sort of directly weight loss related. But if something is very limited in its use, in its application when it comes to being in the kitchen, it's not going to last in a weight loss friendly diet for very long anyway, because it might be inconvenient. You're not going to know how to flavor it right. You're not going to be able to combine it with many meals, What I like about legumes is their versatility. And I found that when I went vegan, in 2015, legumes would really bring my meals to life and help me stay, as I say, full, happy, whilst regaining my health, whilst losing weight at the same time. And for many people, perhaps like myself, who's big meat eater prior to taking those steps of getting meat out of my diet, legumes seemed like a very natural substitute for them. Not necessarily in terms of taste, of course, but more so in terms of the role they fulfilled from a protein perspective. You know what it's like when you first go vegan, you're really worried about the protein, and then you sort of relax on that down the line when you realize it's a non-issue, really. So examples of legumes, we're talking about the whole pulse category, but also peas and whatnot. So we've got our beans, whether it's black beans, red kidney beans, pinto, chickpeas, soybeans I'm even okay with, and so on. Lentils, of course, amazing for you. Red and pui lentils and green lentils, brown lentils, amazing for you. And of course, our peas, split peas, garden green peas, sugar snap peas, and so on, which are technically a legume, contrary to popular belief. But yeah, legumes, absolutely amazing from a weight loss perspective. So if you don't have many legumes in your diet right now and you aren't seeing movement on the scale, I'm not necessarily going to attribute it to this, but I would just say it's wise from a weight loss perspective to have legumes in your diet if you're not doing so already. already. More widely, from a health perspective, they have many amazing properties too, but we're talking about weight loss primarily here today, aren't we? Even though there's overlap. Number two, then, don't be afraid of whole grains. Goodness me, I suppose this can extend to many carbohydrate-rich whole foods for that matter, can't it? Carbs get an awful lot of bad press in that sort of mainstream health and weight loss world. I appreciate we're in a niche here that really respects and understands the nuanced view of carbohydrates. So perhaps I don't need to explain this one too much, but for any newcomers, yeah, I think that the carb phobia is a real obstacle, mental obstacle, let's say, when it comes to weight loss success, and really trusting this whole foods plant-based methodology, which naturally is very high in carbohydrates. People have that reservation and fear. And look, I understand why. I don't mean to sound patronizing or condescending in any way here. I've certainly been there in terms of carbohydrates. I understand why people think this, because there's so much teaching out there that makes you really fearful of the carbohydrate, doesn't it? And don't get me wrong, sometimes this is justified. I understand how people, arrive at the conclusion that carbohydrates are quote unquote bad, even though that's absurdly reductive. I understand why people arrive at that conclusion because, like I say, sometimes it's justified. Those heavily refined junk foods. I'm thinking of carbohydrate-rich foods like soda and candy, right? These are very carbohydrate-rich foods, but there are also foods that have a very high caloric density. Sometimes they have other, it's not just that they're exclusively carbohydrate. There's other macronutrient makeup there, and there's other sort of nasties or chemicals or added bits, let's say, thrown in. And so, again, to reduce food groups just to their macronutrient or just to a macronutrient, it's like talking about, a food that's rich in protein and calling it exclusively a protein. It's like, it's not really a fair label because that's just one macronutrient that it contains. Does that make sense? So it's a very simplistic thing to just sort of lump all carbohydrates, or for that matter, all fat, all protein into one food category. I don't think it's I think it's quite an amateurish way of sort of visualizing and understanding food, though I appreciate people that are beginners with nutrition, they need basic rules and understanding. So I understand and I empathize with people that do this, but I can't hide, my view here that it's sort of an amateurish way of sort of describing and labeling and throwing foods into groups. But anyway, I digress slightly here, but an important point worth mentioning. I think compared to those heavily refined carbohydrate-rich junk foods like the soda and the candy and so on, whole grains are a completely different story. And like I say, lumping all carbohydrates into one group, one reductive category as bad is really a mistake because you neglect key things there like caloric density, fiber. I spoke about that on the previous point. The other sort of nutrients included, the vitamin mineral profile of the foods in question, whether any sugars in those carbohydrate-rich foods are naturally occurring or they're added sugars. You neglect all of those really key properties and characteristics of foods when you just say, carbs are bad, though. Carbs are bad. It's so simplistic. It really grinds my gears if you can't tell from the way I'm ranting on here. Whole grains are such a different thing, though, because they include the whole kernel. So they're not processed over and over and over again. Yes, I suppose one could argue that, like legumes, they have a comparatively high caloric density. I say one could argue. It's true. They have a high caloric density compared to the likes of fruits and veggies and whatnot. But that doesn't mean they need to be steered away from. And you need to get some calories in your diet. Goodness me, you don't want to be running such a tiny calorie amount and having such an aggressive deficit that weight loss becomes incredibly unsustainable, and it's also not helpful for you. You don't have the energy then to focus and perform well as a human being in your day-to-day life. So you don't want to run a massive deficit. If you were only to eat the foods that are quote unquote most optimal for weight loss, you'd probably wind up just eating sort of kale and green salads and maybe the occasional green juice, and you'd probably consume 500 to 600 to 700 calories a day. That really is highly inappropriate. So weight loss isn't about doing as much as possible more than it is about finding consistency in what you can actually adhere to, as I'm always talking about on this channel. But yes, again, I digress. So back to the whole grains. Yes, like legumes, they do have a higher caloric density than fruits and veggies, but they're excellent. And you need to get calories in from somewhere, right? So you may as well do it, not from junk foods, but from something like a whole grain, which is rich in fiber and other great nutrients too. My favorite whole grains at the moment, just to give you some inspiration, there's long lists out there. I've done videos on this previously. You just Google whole grains anyway. There might be some contention about what you classify as a whole grain in terms of those sort of healthier but processed foods like, whole wheat pasta and whole wheat breads, for instance. But generally speaking, you'll get a list of, what I consider to be whole grains just by Googling what are whole grains. They're usually, let's say, Ryan Adams approved. But I'm loving at the moment oats in my muesli. I don't necessarily have oatmeal so often nowadays, but oats, big proponent in my muesli. What else? A big component in my muesli. Brown rice I have, I would say, every other day at least. Quinoa is coming back into my diet quite a lot. And I also love buckwheat, which is a really underestimated whole grain. It's got a slightly different and funny taste, but a brilliant whole grain for weight loss. As I say, though, the whole category is excellent for weight loss. So like the previous point with the legumes, if you're not having many whole grains in your diet, I suppose it depends what else you're currently eating, but certainly make sure you're filling in your diet, filling lots of whole grains into your diet if not doing so already. Number 3 here then, tip and trick number 3, give the faux meats a miss. I spoke about this on my previous live stream as well, so perhaps doesn't need, again, so much focus in this one. We'll just run through it very quickly. Many of those plant-based meat alternatives, they are heavily refined, high in fat, calorically dense, chemicals and nasties thrown in. I think there is this just very simplistic view that maybe I don't think this is, intermediates and people that have been doing this for a long time, more experienced, advanced folk, with this way of eating. I think this is a myth that gets busted quite early on, but the amount of beginners who, in their mind, vegan automatically means healthy. They see the vegan label on a product. Oh, okay, that's good for me then. Folks, it really isn't that straightforward. If only it was that easy and we could eat those Beyond Burgers and lose tremendous amounts of weight. It's not that straightforward. Again, like I spoke about in one of the previous points, this basic view that just because something is vegan or just because something is vegan that it's healthy, you're neglecting fiber, the importance of caloric density, nutrient profile of a food, and so on. Does that make sense? So, and nowadays, my goodness, I don't know what it's like where you live, but here in the UK, you can get vegan everything. Veganized bacon now you can get vegan everything. Vegan beef strips I saw in my local grocery store the other day. And so you get vegan everything. Is it always that healthy? No. So I think there is an argument here that with the faux meats, there's a bit of a case-by-case analysis to be done, because some of those mock meat products or some of the substitutes, let's say, they are quote-unquote better than others. But I think generally, as a rule of thumb, it's very good to have in your mind, look, I should probably focus on the whole foods. If you keep sort of repeating that mantra of whole foods, whole foods, whole foods, you're not going to go too far wrong. It's not a guarantee to weight loss, but certainly it's better choice, typically speaking, than many of those faux meat products. So be wary of those. Bottom line, they tend to be, not every single one, but they tend to be a big no-no for weight loss. Stick to those wonderfully low calorie dense, whole foods. And, this isn't to say your diet has to be perfect and you can never have, whatever it is, a Beyond Burger or whatever they're all called, an Impossible Burger. It's not to say you can never do those things. Just to say that those aren't optimal, and they certainly should be a frequent part of your diet. Okay, so that's number 3. Give those faux meats a miss if you're having lots of those right now. Thank you to those commenting in the chat before we move to tip number 4 here. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Catherine, and everyone else. Sorry if I didn't get to your comments in the chat. Lovely to hear from you all. I can see you're all putting locations. As always, a couple of you from the US, but nice to see folks from different parts of the world here. Thank you very much for your time here today. Number 4 then. This is not necessarily food related, but it is something like tip number 7 will be, but it is something that can absolutely affect your food choices. Actually give yourself a chance to change. Actually give yourself a chance to transform. And that's in terms of taste buds, gut bacteria. If you don't realize the gut plays a huge role, would you believe, in taste preferences, almost like a second brain in the body, some people would argue, and I certainly could make that case too. But also in terms of habits, in terms of discipline and willpower, and your beliefs and values around food, and then more over the medium to long term, the identity element, how you relate to yourself from a health, weight loss, a fitness, a nutrition perspective, a well-being perspective, how you relate to yourself yourself can radically shift. You can go from seeing yourself as, oh, I'm the chocolate addict, or I'm just the person that loves wine. I'm the person, it's impossible for me to lose weight. I was always picked last in sports class. You go from having these stories and narratives about yourself to really shifting and embracing yourself as, oh, I'm the health conscious vegan now. I'm the person that does this now. I'm the tennis player now. I'm the gym goer now. Whatever it is, it's amazing how you can radically change your story about yourself. It takes some time because you have to sort of prove to yourself that you can do that, and your sort of confidence in that process follows. So it does take some time and some compounding, but it's amazing how much you can change in 3 to 6 months, as little as that. You'll even notice story and narrative about yourself changing, I would say, in as little as maybe 4 to 6 weeks. But for this stuff to really solidify and for you to really begin noticing significant change in your story of yourself, your sense of self, both personal and social identity, you're looking at more so 3 to 6 months in my experience. But it's amazing how much this stuff can actually change. The caveat is you need to stick with this long enough so you can tap into those amazing transformations internally. Because if you're only diet hopping, or if you're doing this, maybe you're not diet hopping necessarily, but you're always coming back, you're bouncing back to this whole foods, plant-based way of eating, but you're not doing it consistently enough, you're going to keep limiting and stunting your own growth. You create this almost glass ceiling for yourself, and it becomes very hard to actually break through. Okay, you can lose a couple of pounds here and there, but mentally and emotionally, what are you communicating to yourself when you're the person that ultimately always goes back off track? It doesn't really do wonders for your confidence and your sense of possibility and your sense of potential with this stuff. It's very limiting in that regard. So you have to really deploy some patience. People give up so early on, people give up, I should say, so early on. I mean, people give up for many reasons, just to finish that previous point, but they give up before really either sort of testing thoroughly this new approach. They maybe giving it 5 days and then concluding they're not losing weight, when that's not really fair. You need to at least give it sort of 1.5 weeks here to notice significant progress on the scale. So people sort of don't really ever give anything a fair crack and a fair shot, and that's A. And people give up before really, I suppose point B would be doing it long enough so that this stuff becomes habitual. I think that's really important as well. So it's not just the testing element. You need to give this enough time so you can actually test if it works, but also to the extent that you got to do this long enough so it can become sort of natural for you. And it feels like your new quote unquote default, if that makes sense. I talk about this sort of default setting idea a lot. People love it when I talk about that. Right? You have to do this long enough so it's sort of, I know it's a bit vague and conceptual what I'm saying here, a bit abstract, but you have to do this long enough so that it quote unquote clicks for you and it feels normal and it feels natural. Natural weight loss mastery. Who would have thought it? It feels natural to you. It feels like your new norm. And people don't tend to do that. Now, what I will stress here, this is not the same as me saying, stick with this stubbornly forever, despite what's happening on the scale. You're going to, realistically speaking, you're going to need to see some progress to tap into that sort of positive feedback loop and get that encouragement to keep going. You're going to need to see the scale dropping with weight loss. Or from a health perspective, you're going to need to observe yourself. I know this is super subjective, but observe yourself feeling better, having better mood, having better energy, better vitality. You're going to have to sort of witness some of those victories to give you the positive feedback loop to keep going. It's really hard if you're not seeing progress on the scale, or if you're not seeing progress on the process side of things. It's really hard to keep sort of encouraging yourself to continue doing this, isn't it? It's really hard to keep yourself pepped up and motivated and focused on what you're doing and committed if you're not seeing progress at some stage. So this is not me saying that be so patient that even if you're not seeing progress, you keep sticking with this stubbornly and dogmatically. No, you might need to make changes. So never be so patient that you keep doing stuff that doesn't create results, because ultimately you might need to make changes. But generally, I think on that sort of patience to impatience scale, because you can go too far either way, I think generally speaking, most certainly new weight loss hopefuls, they tend to be certainly more impatient than they are patient. They certainly tend to be more impatient than is practical. My favorite saying, and my clients are probably sick of me saying this at this stage because I'm always saying this to them, but people tend to overestimate how much weight they can lose in a month, but underestimate how much weight they can lose in a year. I think that's huge. The change, as I alluded to, right at the start of this point, the changes you can make over the sort of medium to long term, not over weeks necessarily, but over months and certainly years. The compounding that happens when you've been doing this for years is amazing. But the change that you can oversee here in a matter of months to years is absolutely incredible. And people tend to underestimate how flexible in terms of sort of identity and beliefs and values around food, fitness, as I say, weight loss, well-being generally. People tend to underestimate how sort of let's say flexible and fluid they can actually be and how much they can sort of rejig and reshift. So yeah, really important. Be patient, bottom line, and actually give yourself the chance to change. How do you become patient? How do you give yourself the opportunity to change and actually stick with this to the extent that you do begin to internally transform? Number one, you need to focus on process, which I've sort of alluded to throughout, not just the scale results. So you actually need to put value and emphasis on the way you're changing along the way beyond just what the number on the scale says. So that's number one, focus on the process. Number two, remember and appreciate how far you've come. It's probably a bit of a weakness in my game as well. Sometimes you can get so ambitious and so caught up with this and so maybe frustrated about where you're at that you don't take a step back sometimes and think, okay, yeah, I'm giving myself a hard time here because I want to change. But at the same time, worth acknowledging how far I've come. I've seen people that have actually done very, very well, lost decent amounts of weight. Just in their mind, they had a different expectation, so they stop and give up. Whereas a bit of sort of taking a step back and having that sort of hindsight, doing that introspection and actually saying, you know what? Okay, this isn't going as much as I wanted and I've still got a little bit of a way to go here. But compared to December last year, compared to July, compared to that time when I was doing keto, wow, goodness me, this is so much better. And to just, sort of flip the script a little bit and remember how far you've come rather than always being sort of this ambitious go-getter, it really does help you become patient and just, okay, well, I can take peace of mind. I am changing. I've got work to do, but I can be patient in this process and I can see the bigger picture here. It's actually working for me. I'm on the downward trend overall. Okay, not every when, not every day, and I'm maybe not perfect with every single meal week in, week out. But actually, I can see the downward trend. I can see the progress here overall. That's the bottom line. I'm going in the right direction. And how to become patient, tip number 3, make it suitable for your lifestyle. Goodness me, I like to think of what I do here as providing you guys with a template, if you'll accept that from me. Providing you with some kind of template, if you'd allow me to do that. But then you need to do a bit of sort of playing around so it suits your lifestyle, your schedule. Don't do meals that are too elaborate for you. If you're running a really busy schedule, you don't want recipes that take 40 minutes to make, unless you're doing batch cooking, of course. That's the obvious exception, right? You need to make this suitable for you. We're talking about food, of course, exclusively or maybe primarily today, but definitely this extends to exercise too, right? Don't set the bar too high with exercise. Don't commit to going to the gym that's 40 minutes away when really maybe walking would be a better place for you to start. Okay, you can build up to other stuff in time. I don't want to put you off going to the gym. It's a wonderful pursuit. But, there might be an easier sort of, let's say, stepping stone for you to take that might have a much higher chance of success because it's much more agreeable for where you're at right now. It's going to be really hard to be consistent if this stuff doesn't feel like it can actually stick or it has longevity. So make sure you're taking any templates that you're getting from me or any other teachers out there. Make sure you're taking those and you're treating them, as I say, as a template. Do a bit of editing so they actually suit your lifestyle. That's going to be huge. So that one, which one was that? Number 4. Hopefully you're enjoying these and finding value in this so far. Number 5 then, tip number 5 here. For weight loss on a plant-based diet, be mindful of oil. I kick this one down the list. Usually in these sorts of lists about what people are doing wrong from a whole foods plant-based perspective, the oil thing gets raised much earlier on. Had to, of course, have mention here, but it's number 5. Not that I did these in any particular order, folks. I just sort of held this one back because I think it's fairly obvious. But yeah, you want to be mindful of oil. Why? It has an extremely high caloric density. And it's also very limited in nutrients. So high in calories, but low in nutrients, meaning very little bang for your buck in terms of what oil actually provides. At least with something that's calorically dense like nuts, a whole food that's calorically dense like nuts and seeds, for instance, you actually get a bunch of nutrition. Yes, it's high in caloric density like oil is, not as high, but it's high in caloric density comparatively compared to, our whole grains, our legumes, our fruits, veggies, tubers, and so on. So nuts and seeds, high in caloric density comparatively, but at the same time, you get so many amazing nutrients with it. A brilliant vitamin and mineral profile with nuts and seeds, generally speaking. So I almost see it as a very good trade-off. High in calories, but also very rich in nutrients. Oil, think about oil. It's a terrible trade-off. Extremely high in calories, but the intense way that it's processed again and again and again, refined again and again and again, means by the time you get oil, extremely, extremely limited in calories. So it's a terrible trade-off in terms of nutrition, nourishment per calorie. Now, some on the flip side would argue that oil, what about the healthy fats though? There's much better sources. My response to that is there's always much better sources. I just mentioned nuts and seeds, for example, much better sources of healthy fats if that's what you feel is missing from your diet and needs work right now. When it comes to the likes of the omegas, again, you can get them elsewhere incredibly easily. And again, as a backup plan, just take a DHA supplement like I recommend as mandatory anyway, an omega-3 supplement, and you'll be absolutely fine. You don't need to rely on oil as a source of healthy fats. Much better sources indeed. This brings up the question, because many people are in alignment with me on this, and they're like, okay, I understand. Okay, that's a compelling case, Rye, but what am I going to do? Because I'm so used to cooking with oil. I enjoy the taste of oil. Well, there's two objections there. So there's one, two problems, let's say, there to resolve. One, how do you cook without oil? And number two, how do I make food taste good without oil? Let's go through them one at a time. Number one, then, how do you cook without oil? Simply saute in things like water, soy sauce, stock. With those things, because they're water-based, you need to sort of keep an eye on the pan, let's say, a little bit more, and you might need to add more as you go. Whereas with oil, you can sort of sprinkle on a little bit. You can, drizzle on rather, not sprinkling oil everywhere. You can sort of drizzle on a little bit, and you can sort of have faith that you probably don't need to add more to the pan if you use the right amount in the first instance. Oil, of course, water, is going to burn off, and so, it's going to condensate. And so you need to maybe keep an eye on the pan and maybe keep topping up as you're cooking something. Once you get used to that, once you get used to the fact that you can't sort of walk away from the pan for like 4 or 5 minutes necessarily all that easily, you'll be absolutely fine with it. And that's just when you're sauteing anyway. It depends what you're making, of course. But yeah, you can saute in water, soy sauce, vegetable stock. I suppose it depends what you're making. There's other, you could use applesauce. It really depends on what you're making. But generally, what I tend to recommend is water, soy sauce, or vegetable stock for cooking without oil. And then in terms of that second objection or second problem to overcome in terms of the taste element of oil, how do you make food taste good without oil? Basically just seasonings and the right cooking method, and you'll replace it. I mean, when I say replace it, you're not going to replace it like for like, because there is no substitution. Don't get me wrong. I don't cook with oil at home now. The only time I have oil is when I eat out occasionally, now and again. I certainly don't cook with oil at home. It's not even in my apartment here. Goodness me. Goodness forbid. I'm just so used to doing without now. But it doesn't, sorry, I've digressed slightly there, but it doesn't, it's very hard to replace oil because of what it does to food, especially if you're like baking and grilling things, frying as well. But I think particularly baking, it's really, I won't lie to you, if you're cooking vegetables, it isn't going to be the same. They aren't going to necessarily create that crispness that oil would provide and the texture and the taste that oil might provide. So when I say replacement, that might not be quite the right word, but sort of having the right seasonings, having a decent cooking method, your food can taste great anyway. I won't lie to you, it does take some adjusting to going without oil if you're used to it. But again, the amount of clients that I've had that when they've just gone a couple of weeks without oil, cooking at home at least, even if they have the occasional meal out, when they go a couple of weeks without oil, they become so sensitive to it, to the extent that they go and have a meal out, or a friend cooks for them once in a while, and the oil is just like, oh, it's greasy. It makes them feel awful because you become so hypersensitive to the stuff that you don't have anymore, or the stuff that you go without, rather. So you'll get there with the oil, and you'll soon realize, wow, what a difference oil makes in a bad sense. Not in a good sense, but in a bad sense. So when you go without it and then you introduce it again, it's like, my goodness, it just feels so heavy and greasy. And if I have a meal now that's too oily, it actually ruins it for me. It's all I can taste. Such an emphasis I place on it. I can't taste any other flavors. So yeah, I suppose there is a light if you're an oil lover, I suppose my argument here is there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can truly change. Again, so much goes back to what I was saying on the previous point. Give yourself a chance to actually change, right? Stick with this long enough. It's amazing how your taste buds and your food preferences do genuinely change. So just make sure you're seasoning, using the right cooking method, using the right ingredients. Your food can still taste amazing without oil. Just takes a little bit of getting used to, I would say. Okay, what's our next one on our list here? Number 6 then. Oh, this is huge. Understand that it's not always about eating less, but more so eating right. How often, again, maybe not in this community so much, but how often in the past have you heard eat less and move more, just eat less and move more, as if that's the secret formula to weight loss? How many times have we heard that? Now, in principle, I mean, it's not actually terrible advice. Like, lots of people do eat too much and lots of people don't eat very much. And then changing both of those sides of the equation is very likely to lead to weight loss. But it's a very simple soundbite, isn't it? And I think when you get caught in this sort of eat less and move more mentality, those become your only two sort of planes of, it's not the right turn of phrase, but they become your only two levers to pull, let's say. It's like, how long are you going to continue to eat less for? How far can that actually take you? Let's say you start eating less and that helps you lose the first 5 pounds. What happens then? What, you're going to continue just to eat less and less and less, right? Or with the exercise, what, you're going to continue to just do more and more and more? Where does that end? You've only got 2 levers to pull. I don't think it's a very comprehensive strategy, let's say. So many times have we heard that eat less and move more. It's a bit simplistic, isn't it? There's a very big difference, I would say, first point in arguing against that sort of eat less, move more mantra. Or at least the eat less end of the spectrum, or the eat less part of it, let's say. There's a very big difference between food volume and calories. So when someone says to you, just eat less, or when someone says that to me, or I hear that turn of phrase, my immediate thought is, well, what do you actually mean? Just eat less? Eat less what? Food volume, bulk, food, or the caloric amount of it? I find it a bit of a vague statement. So do you eat less food? Do you eat fewer calories? What does that mean? When you actually load your plate, though, with low calorie density foods, like we're often talking about here, you'll actually find you can eat a decent, and a very generous, I would say, I think decent's underplaying it, but a very generous amount of food and maintain a very suitable calorie deficit for you at the same time. This nutrition approach for me is unparalleled in terms of the amount of food you can actually eat. You know, I used that phrase earlier, getting good bang for your buck. Well, in terms of this whole food plant-based way of eating, yes, I spoke about like nuts and seeds as an example earlier. Yes, there are some foods under, let's say, the whole foods plant-based umbrella that they have, compared to other foods, a high caloric density. But generally speaking, most of the foods with this way of eating, most of the ingredients that I suggest you guys base the majority of your plates around, the majority of your meals around, they tend to have a low caloric density, meaning you can add all of these foods to your diet, add all these foods to your plate, create quite a lot of volume for comparatively few calories compared to a standard Western diet, compared to a keto diet, compared to a diet that's very rich in certainly processed foods, certainly meat and dairy. And so what an advantage that is from a weight loss perspective. For me in the past, I don't know about you, comment down below if this resonates. For me in the past, weight loss was always synonymous with like hard work and quote unquote like really strict dieting. And for many reasons, I would find it really strict. But from a calorie perspective, this idea of eating less all the time, well, it's when you're eating lots of animal products, for example, or lots of processed foods, lots of meat and dairy, it's like that eat less thing, you wind up eating tiny portions because of the calorie richness of those things. Whereas with this approach, you get all the fiber, you get the bulk, you get the water content of fruits and veggies and whatnot. And it means you can fill up the plate, and the bang for your buck in terms of calories per pound, calories per ounce, calories per gram, whatever your chosen measure is, absolutely amazing, unparalleled. So I think this way of eating is incredible in that regard. Here's just a small example. I don't know if this is the best comparison, but just to put it in some kind of visual perspective now, 3 ounces of chocolate equates to 4, or gives you rather, and of course it depends on brand and whatnot, but generally 3 ounces of chocolate, 465 calories. For just 3 ounces of chocolate, that's not a lot. For my friends here in the UK, that's not a lot. 3 ounces is not a lot for 465 calories. You take the equivalent amount of strawberries, 3 ounces of strawberries. Remember, 465 chocolate. What do you think? What do you think strawberries will be for the same amount? Now, obviously, it's less because of the way I'm building this up. Hopefully, you should know that anyway. But how much more less do you think it is? Let me tell you, It's actually less than 5%, or is about 5%, might be about 5%. 28 calories. 28 calories, around 5% of the calories per ounce of chocolate. Absolutely amazing. Okay, that's one maybe extreme example of a very high caloric density food to a particularly low caloric density food. But just to put this into perspective, when you play a volume game, it really opens up, or it really breaks that paradigm that weight loss needs to be about eating less. And you actually start realizing, no, actually, I can actually eat huge volumes of food. Not that you necessarily need to. You don't want to be stuffed, all right? That's not wise. But I can actually comparatively very, very generous volumes of food and actually maintain a better calorie deficit than if I was doing a more flexible dieting approach or whatever it is that you tried in the past. So my advice to you, research this volume eating methodology, and rather than thinking about eating less all the time and coming from like a place of scarcity where it's always cut back, restrict further, deprive, more so think about eating right. And it's a really, really big distinction and a big move away from what's taught in the mainstream health and weight loss world. Huge. Finally here, as we build up to number 7, let me just have another swig. Number 7, our final one before we wrap up. Not rationalizing, settling where you are. And like number 4, okay, this one isn't necessarily food related, but it certainly will affect your food choices. Not basically what I'm saying here, not settling for a level of health or weight progress that you're unhappy with through some kind of what I call copium. I don't know if many people know what I mean by that. It's sort of, I suppose, Twitter, Reddit speak, but copium, or let's say rationalizations, not settling where you are and holding on to a belief to protect you from changing and keep you in your comfort zone. Sometimes beliefs about ourselves can be very comfortable. They allow us an excuse to stay where we're at. And that's, I suppose, what I mean by copium, not facing up to the reality that actually you need to improve here. And yes, it's going to be tough, but you'll be better off for it. Some people will run away from that adversity and that challenge, and they'll hold and cling on to a limiting belief to almost justify that. My mother had a slow metabolism, therefore it's okay for me to be overweight. You've got to be super careful with this stuff, just as an example. Other examples, and I hear this one a lot, especially with the ladies. I don't want to lose my curves. Again, be careful with this. Be really careful with this. I'm too old. I spoke about this on Instagram the other day. Quote unquote, I'm too old to lose weight. Is that actually true? Or is that just a nice, convenient reason to not actually change? Another one, nobody around me gets what I'm doing. My immediate harsh, it sounds a bit clinical, but my honest, harsh response to that would be, so what, you want their results, do you? If you want their results, fair enough, capitulate and just do as they're doing. But if you want something different from what most people around you have, and given the state of the Western world from an obesity perspective, it's probably not unreasonable for me to suggest that most of your friends and family aren't in all that great shape. Okay, I'm being presumptuous, but based on probability, I think that probably mirrors reality fairly well. What? Because other people don't care about this, or other people don't get and resonate with what you're doing here, that means you shouldn't do something that you know you need to do? That really is copium 101. That's so sad to hear. And you can't let yourself get away with that kind of self-talk. If I'm being, totally brutally honest about this, that's how I view things. You can't let yourself get away with that. Okay, just to hone in on that particular belief of nobody around me gets it. Yes, it would be nice to feel supported. Yes, arguably it is harder when you're isolated. So I'm not completely sort of invalidating that as an obstacle altogether. That's not what I mean. But if you allow that belief to be the reason or the comfort blanket for you to not actually change, then you've got to call yourself out on it. Yes, it's a genuine obstacle. Of course it is, if you feel you're sort of fighting your own battle here and nobody around you resonates with it. Yes, I argue that is a genuine threat to weight loss progress. But as a reason to not try, no, you're dishonoring yourself if you allow that to happen. Another one, I don't hear this too often, but I remember this ringing around in my head. So this is one that particularly resonates with me. Being skinny won't automatically make me happy anyway. Having a nice body doesn't make you happy. Now, I think you probably hear this one with money more. And as somebody that has started their own business here, when I talk to people about business advice, this is one of the first bits of like rationalization and copium I hear from people. And look, if you don't care about your financial life, Like, that doesn't bother me. I don't think it's all that important. Once you can take care of yourself, and if you have a bit of cash in the bank to look after other people, I think that's good. You don't need to be mega rich, do you, to be comfortable financially? So if you don't care about money, if I'm talking to someone about business and they don't care about money or their career that much, that's I've got no judgment with that. But one of the things I hear constantly is, oh, well, making more money is not going to make me happy anyway. And it's like, is that true? Because there is simultaneously that belief, having more money won't make me happy, or being skinny, being slim, having my dream physique won't make me more happy. That's both true and false, isn't it? In my mind, I can argue both for and against why that's true and why that's false. There's two sides of the coin there. On one hand, yes. On one hand, no. But what people will do is they'll automatically disregard the benefits of being slim or having their dream physique by saying something like, well, it won't make me happy anyway. Or like I say with the money example, I think that's probably a more prevalent example. It's like, what? So you're not even going to try in your career? You're not even push yourself? You're not even going to try and help your colleagues better and help? Like, I don't mind if you don't care. You do you. We're slightly digressing here. But if you know that you'd be better off with maybe a small promotion or pay rise so you could take care of your family better and be more secure, or you know your health would be better off by losing a little bit of weight, you've got to be careful not to cling on that stuff. Because it is true, like being skinny, yes, or being slim, it won't automatically make you happy. Having a bit more money in the bank, it won't automatically make you happy. But if you believe that so much that you sort of disregard the other benefits that those things can yield, that's, again, copium 101. So, I've sort of unpacked this one a bit. I'm not going to unpack the previous ones. We don't really have time to do that today. But generally speaking, I would say my advice here is just be mindful of how easy it is to sort of self-justify / settle where you're at by, how do I word this? Here it is, overplaying the downsides or disadvantages of doing something. Oh, I don't want to lose weight. It's such hard work. It's not worth the trouble. Says who? By what? Is that true? Do you really believe that in your heart? You've got to be able to play devil's advocate with some of those beliefs that spring into your head and make sure you're not just comfortably believing those things, or rather, conveniently believing those things, because it gives you a green light, a free pass, a reason, a comfort blanket to not actually change. So make sure that you're not settling and you're not self-justifying. Now, if you're happy with the weight you're at, fine, but you're probably not watching this video, and you certainly wouldn't have stayed this long if you're watching the live, right? But just be careful, that you don't overplay like the downsides and disadvantages. Oh, being slim, like I said with that one, being slim won't make me happy. It's like, okay, so there's one disadvantage of losing weight. Well, it won't make me happy anyway. Okay, but what about all the benefits it will bring? And who's to say? But we could play with this all day long. This is all story, isn't it? I could play with this all day long. Who's to say it wouldn't make you happier as well, by the way? But yeah, try not to, overplay the supposed downsides and disadvantages of actually trying to do this thing in the first place. I think that's it, my friends. Those are my 7 tips and tricks to lose weight on a plant-based diet. Let me know in the comments. I always appreciate the feedback. Let me know in the comments which of these you feel you might need to work on. Maybe it's one or several. So let me know down below which of these you feel you need to work on. And if you are sick and tired, of trying to figure out how to do this by yourself, how to get the scale moving, how to transform your body and your mind on your own, go to rationadamscoaching.com. Once more, that's rationadamscoaching.com, or click the link. I'll put it in the description box down below to learn more about my vegan, slim and sustained coaching program, where I help vegans and plant-based dieters lose their first 20 pounds in 12 weeks. If you want to work with me, go to rationadamscoaching.com or click the link below. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you ever so much for your time. Again, this is another sort of live stream where I was maybe hoping I had time to get to questions, but I'm looking at the time now and sadly not. But I promise you we'll do a dedicated Q&A live stream at some point in the very near future, some point in the coming week or two. I promise you that's on the cards, okay? Thank you ever so much for your time. My friends, I'll see you very soon. Have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye.